Winter 1943, Kursk Oblast, Russia. The thunderous impact of the 80mm shell against the T-34's turret sent shockwaves through Sergeant Mikhail Petrov's body. He instinctively ducked, expecting the catastrophic breach that would end his life in milliseconds. 3 seconds passed. 5. 10. The expected inferno never came. The German Tiger's perfectly aimed shot had failed to penetrate. Shaking with adrenaline, Petrov ordered his driver to advance. This impossible survival would happen again 4 times that day, as shells that should have turned their tank into a burning coffin somehow ricocheted off the armored hull. "Something is different," the young sergeant recorded in his diary that night. "Our tank should not have survived today." What Petrov couldn't know was that his T-34's armor plates had been forged using American steel alloy, delivered through the Lend-Lease program. The strange blue markings on the interior hull panels, dismissed as manufacturing codes, were actually Republic Steel's quality verification stamps. These small industrial hieroglyphics represented an unprecedented alliance between Soviet design and American metallurgy. Across the Eastern Front that winter, 71,193 Soviet tanks would eventually contain critical American steel components. Their crews, like Petrov's, found themselves experiencing something previously unknown in the brutal arithmetic of Soviet tank warfare: extended survival. Before American steel began arriving in significant quantities, the average Soviet tank survived just 14 days of combat operations. Tank crews had learned to carry only essential personal items, knowing their vehicles were effectively mobile coffins. By early 1943, crew survivability rates began showing inexplicable improvements. Tanks were withstanding hits that would have destroyed them months earlier. Joseph Stalin had reluctantly accepted American industrial aid through the Lend-Lease program established in March 1941. Official Soviet military doctrine downplayed its importance. The party couldn't admit dependence on capitalist production. Yet beneath the propaganda, the flow of 4,478,116 tons of American steel was transforming Soviet armored warfare. A revolution measured in millimeters of armor thickness and molecular composition was unfolding on the battlefield. Captain Nikolai Voroshilov of the 3rd Guards Tank Army first documented the pattern in February 1943. Tasked with investigating anomalous vehicle survival rates, he examined tanks returning from combat. His classified report, only declassified in 1997, concluded, T-34 models utilizing American-supplied armor plate consistently demonstrate 37% greater resistance to German 75mm and 88mm anti-tank rounds. Crew survival rates have increased accordingly. The report vanished into Soviet archives, but its findings played out daily on the battlefield. For Soviet tankers, the psychological transformation was profound. Tank crews had operated under a grim fatalism. Their expected combat lifespan rarely exceeded 3 engagements. The mathematics of survival had conditioned them for sacrifice rather than victory. As American steel altered these equations, a new psychology emerged. Crews began personalizing their vehicles, painting names on turrets, carrying photographs, making minor comfort modifications. These small acts of permanence revealed their unconscious recognition of improved survival odds. German gunners noticed the change too. SS Hauptsturmführer Otto Carius of the 502nd Heavy Panzer Battalion recorded his frustration in March 1943. The Russian T-34s now require multiple direct hits. Previously, a single well-placed shot was sufficient. Something has changed in their armor quality. German intelligence eventually traced this improvement to American metallurgical technology, but could do little to counter it. While German steel production struggled under resource limitations and bombing, American foundries produced vast quantities of high-quality alloy steel, shipping it across dangerous Arctic sea routes to Murmansk and Archangel. The steel itself represented industrial capacity beyond Soviet capabilities. American mills achieved consistent carbon content of 0.23–0.28%, with manganese, silicon, and molybdenum ratios precisely controlled through spectroscopic analysis. This standardization was routine for American industry, but revolutionary for Soviet production, where quality varied significantly between batches. Every ton of American steel delivered to Magnitogorsk and other Soviet tank factories brought not just raw material, but embedded industrial methodology that Soviet engineers studied and gradually adopted. Sergeant Petrov's unit would destroy 11 German vehicles over the next month, losing just 2 T-34s, despite facing superior German tanks. His personal T-34, nicknamed Resilient in carefully painted Cyrillic letters, would survive 27 engagements before factory refurbishment. Petrov himself would live to see Berlin, an outcome statistically improbable without American steel. As spring thawed the frozen Ukrainian soil in 1943, Soviet tank commanders began reporting an unexpected pattern. Their units retained combat effectiveness longer, keeping experienced crews together through multiple engagements. This preservation of human expertise, the gunners who knew exactly where to aim, the drivers who instinctively found hull-down positions, created compounding tactical advantages. The steel protecting their bodies was simultaneously preserving institutional knowledge that had previously died with each destroyed tank. What began as metallurgical improvement was becoming psychological transformation. The mathematics of abundance were being written in carbon and manganese, in precisely controlled alloys and consistent molecular structures, revealing an American industrial capacity that rendered Soviet sacrifice not noble necessity, but avoidable waste. The tank crews couldn't articulate the change, but they felt it with every German shell that failed to penetrate their armor. American steel was rewriting the rules of survival on the Eastern Front, one ricocheting 80 mm of round at a time. November 1942. Homestead, Pennsylvania. The molten steel poured from the massive ladle, glowing orange-white at 1,600 degrees Celsius, casting harsh shadows across the cavernous U.S. steel mill floor. The American steelworker, drenched in sweat despite the winter cold outside, watched as the precisely calibrated mixture flowed into molds. He couldn't know that this particular heat, one of thousands produced weekly, would eventually form the armor protecting Soviet tankers 5,000 miles away. The standardized chemical composition, 0.25% carbon, 1.5% manganese, carefully measured silicon and molybdenum, represented metallurgical precision beyond anything Soviet industry could achieve consistently. The industrial symphony playing out across America's steel belt represented production capacity that dwarfed both Axis and Soviet capabilities combined. U.S. steel alone produced 31.8 million tons in 1942, a figure that exceeded Germany's entire national output of 28.7 million tons. Bethlehem Steel added another 23.4 million tons. Even as these corporations fulfilled enormous domestic military orders, Liberty ships, Sherman tanks, aircraft carriers, they still manufactured millions of tons for Lend-Lease shipment to the USSR. In a single month, December 1942, American mills produced more high-quality armor plate than the Soviet Union manufactured throughout the entire first year of the war. The quality difference proved as significant as the quantity. American metallurgists employed spectroscopic analysis to ensure precise chemical composition in every heat. Automated rolling mills maintained thickness tolerances of plus 0.02 inches across entire armor plates, creating consistency impossible in Soviet production. These seemingly minor technical details translated directly to battlefield survival. When German 88mm shells struck American-made armor at oblique angles, the consistent hardness and ductility caused reliable deflection rather than catastrophic penetration. Soviet engineers initially regarded American steel specifications with skepticism. Major Pavel Rybalko, senior metallurgist at the Kharkov tank factory, initially dismissed the detailed American manufacturing standards as capitalist extravagance. After conducting comparative ballistic tests, however, he wrote to Moscow in January 1943. The American armor demonstrates superior resistance to penetration by 20.4% compared to our best domestic production. Their consistent quality control processes must be studied and implemented. This reluctant acknowledgement of American superiority eventually led to Soviet adoption of similar quality control methods, though wartime exigencies limited full implementation. The logistics of delivering this industrial bounty to the USSR represented another American triumph. Massive Liberty ships and converted freighters departed from Baltimore, Philadelphia and New York, carrying up to 10,500 tons each of steel plate, billets, and specialized alloys. German U-boats patrolled the shipping lanes relentlessly, sinking over 100 vessels bound for Murmansk and Archangel. Yet the sheer volume overwhelmed German interdiction efforts. For every ship lost, 5 more completed the journey. Even with 21.3% shipping losses in the winter convoys of 1942-43, over 4 million tons of American steel reached Soviet factories. At Magnitogorsk, the Soviet Union's largest steel complex, American equipment and expertise transformed production capabilities. American engineers installed continuous rolling mills, improving both output and quality. Soviet workers marveled at the precision of American measuring instruments, accurate to 1/10,000th of an inch. These tools enabled consistent production of armor plate with precisely controlled hardness, between 280 and 320 on the Brinell scale, optimized for maximum protection without brittleness. The resulting T-34 armor incorporated the best of both worlds. Innovative Soviet design with American metallurgical precision. The contrast with German production proved stark. By 1943, German steel mills relied increasingly on low-grade Swedish iron ore and suffered critical shortages of molybdenum, vanadium, and tungsten, key alloying elements available in abundance to American producers. While American mills operated continuously, German production faced disruption from Allied bombing. Krupp Steel Works in Essen endured 73 separate air raids during 1943, reducing output by 28%. The resulting quality control problems plagued German armor, creating inconsistent protection for their tanks. American steel's journey from Pennsylvania to the turret of a T-34 typically took 47 days. Plates shipped from Baltimore on January 15, 1943, would reach Murmansk by February 12, travel by rail to Nizhny Tagil tank factories by February 23, undergo fabrication into components by March 1, and reach the front installed on a completed T-34 by early March. This timeline, detailed in Soviet logistics records declassified after the Cold War, represented remarkable efficiency given the vast distances and wartime conditions involved. The molecular composition of American steel created battlefield advantages invisible to the naked eye, yet decisive in combat. The precise 0.23–0.28% carbon content achieved through open hearth furnace control unavailable in Soviet facilities created the optimal balance between hardness and ductility. When struck by German shells, this perfectly calibrated metallurgy absorbed and distributed impact energy rather than cracking. Soviet tank crews couldn't see the molecular structures protecting them, but they experienced the results. Survival where death had previously been certain. By spring 1943, approximately 37% of all T-34 tanks contained significant amounts of American steel. The proportion would increase to 53% by year's end. Lend-Lease deliveries included not just raw materials, but complete components. Transmission housings, drive sprockets, road wheels, manufactured to tolerances previously unattainable in Soviet production. These precision components improved overall reliability, increasing the T-34's operational range from 186 kilometers to 275 kilometers between maintenance stops. For tank crews, this translated to less time performing field repairs exposed to enemy fire. What began as reluctant Soviet acceptance of American material aid evolved into industrial synthesis. Soviet designers paired their innovative T-34 design with its revolutionary sloped armor and excellent mobility, with American industrial precision. The resulting tanks retained their distinctive Soviet characteristics while incorporating the invisible advantages of American metallurgy. This industrial collaboration, unacknowledged in Soviet propaganda yet documented in factory records, represented one of history's most consequential technological transfers. Each ricocheting German shell demonstrated this unlikely partnership between capitalist industry and communist design. March 1943. Kharkov Sector, Ukraine. Lieutenant Dmitry Lavrenenko's tank battalion had been engaged continuously for 72 hours, an operational duration previously unthinkable. Before American steel arrived, such extended combat would have left most tanks destroyed and crews dead. Instead, 7 of his original 10 T-34s remained operational. The battalion's maintenance log told an unprecedented story. 38 recorded direct hits from German anti-tank weapons with only 3 catastrophic penetrations. Lavrenenko documented this miracle in his after-action report. Our tanks withstand hits that 6 months ago would have destroyed them completely. Crews now survive engagements that were previously unsurvivable. The Battle of Prokhorovka during July 1943 provided the most dramatic demonstration of improved Soviet tank survivability. The largest tank battle in history saw 978 Soviet tanks engage 200 German Panthers and Tigers. German gunners reported multiple direct hits on T-34s without achieving kills. Oberleutnant Karl Voll of the 2nd SS Panzer Division recorded his frustration. I personally observed 5 confirmed hits on a single T-34 from our 75mm gun. The Soviet tank continued operating with only minor damage. This would have been impossible during previous engagements. Soviet losses at Prokhorovka remained high, 320 tanks destroyed. But critically, crew survival rates had improved dramatically. Approximately 62% of tank crews survived their vehicles being knocked out, compared to only 25% in 1941-42. The statistical transformation appeared in classified Soviet military analyses. A report from the Red Army's Armored Directorate, dated September 1943, documented T-34 tanks manufactured with American armor components demonstrate a 43% reduction in penetration by standard German 75mm rounds at ranges of 500 to 700 meters. Crew fatality rates have decreased proportionately, allowing experienced personnel to be recovered for subsequent operations. This clinical language masks the human reality, thousands of men returning to their families who would otherwise have perished. For German tankers, the battlefield equation was changing disturbingly. SS Sturmbannführer Johannes Mühlenkamp of the 5th SS Panzer Division reported in August 1943. Soviet T-34s now regularly require 3 to 5 direct hits to ensure destruction. Our ammunition expenditure has increased by approximately 200% per enemy tank destroyed. This forced German commanders to revise tactical doctrine, abandoning the previous assumption that a single well-placed shot would destroy a Soviet tank. The psychological impact on German tank crews was significant. Their perceived technological advantage was eroding precisely as Soviet numbers were increasing. Inside the T-34s, Soviet crews experienced a transformation beyond mere survival. Captain Nikolai Ogakov, a tank commander with the 2nd Guards Tank Army, wrote in his memoir, "We began to attack more aggressively, knowing our armor would protect us. Before, we attacked expecting to die. Now, we attacked expecting to live and continue fighting." This psychological shift rippled throughout Soviet armored forces. Crews began developing extended tactics requiring multiple engagements, planning multi-day operations previously considered impossible due to expected vehicle losses. The technical aspects of American enhanced armor created compounding advantages beyond simple survival. The precisely controlled hardness of American steel, between 280-320 on the Brunel scale, optimized protection against German 75mm and 81mm rounds specifically. Against the common German 75mm Pak-40 anti-tank gun, American steel T-34 armor provided effective protection at ranges beyond 600 meters, an improvement of 150 meters over previous Soviet armor. This expanded the operational safety margin for Soviet tankers, allowing them to engage from distances previously considered dangerously close. Technical improvements extended beyond armor plate. American-manufactured transmission components increased reliability dramatically. Before Lend-Lease components arrived, T-34 transmissions typically failed after 2,500 kilometers. American-made transmissions regularly exceeded 5,000 kilometers between failures. For tank crews, this meant less time exposed outside their vehicles performing dangerous field repairs. Major Ivan Konev of the 5th Guards Tank Army noted in his operational assessment, "Tanks with American drive components remain operational 2.4 times longer between major maintenance requirements, significantly increasing our sustained combat capability." The human consequences of these technical improvements emerged in personal accounts. Senior Sergeant Vasily Krysov, a T-34 commander who survived 23 separate engagements, recorded, "After my third tank was hit but didn't burn, I began to believe we might survive this war. The armor gave us time to escape even when penetrated. Before, we expected to burn immediately. The extra seconds provided by improved armor often meant the difference between death and survival, allowing crews to escape even from mortally damaged vehicles." By late 1943, Soviet tank tactics had evolved to capitalize on improved survivability. Colonel Pavel Rotmistrov, commander of the 5th Guards Tank Army, developed new offensive doctrines based on the assumption of extended vehicle survival. His approach, detailed in training documents from November 1943, emphasized sustained operations over several days, a stark contrast to previous Soviet tactics that assumed high vehicle attrition would necessitate constant reinforcement. Tank crews now trained for maintenance during multi-day operations, rather than simply abandoning damaged vehicles. The battlefield evidence became undeniable. Statistical analysis from the Kursk salient showed Soviet tank losses decrease by 31% while advancing the same distance against similar opposition compared to 1942 operations. German reports confirmed this transformation. General Heinz Guderian, Inspector General of Armored Troops, warned in October 1943, "Soviet tanks have achieved a concerning level of resilience. Their improved armor protection requires tactical adjustment throughout our anti-tank forces." This reluctant acknowledgement from Germany's foremost tank expert confirmed what Soviet crews already knew. Their vehicles were no longer the death traps of previous years. What began as a metallurgical improvement had blossomed into psychological transformation. Soviet tank crews who previously viewed themselves as expendable now operated with newfound confidence. Their vehicles, incorporating the best of Soviet design and American industrial precision, had become weapons capable of sustained operation rather than single-use sacrificial platforms. As winter approached in late 1943, this transformation would prove critical in the offensives that would drive German forces permanently from Soviet territory. December 1943, Washington, D.C. The massive ledger on the War Production Board administrator's desk told a story in columns of numbers. American steel shipments to the Soviet Union had reached 4,478,116 tons since the initiation of Lend-Lease. This single statistic, carefully compiled from shipping manifests and production reports, represented industrial output so vast it challenged comprehension. A closer examination revealed the specialized allocations: 976,543 tons of armor plate, 287,451 tons of high-grade structural steel, 723,918 tons of tool steel. Each category represented protection for Soviet tank crews that domestic Soviet production could not provide in sufficient quantity or quality. The mathematics of survival emerged from statistical analysis. Before the integration of American steel, Soviet tank losses averaged 74.3% during major offensive operations. By late 1943, this figure had declined to 43.7%, despite facing improved German anti-tank weapons. Tank crew survival rates showed even more dramatic improvement. In 1941-42, only 22% of crewmen survived the destruction of their vehicle. American enhanced armor increased this to 57% by December 1943. These dry percentages represented thousands of Soviet tankers returning to their families rather than perishing in burning vehicles. The contrast between Soviet domestic steel production and American contributions revealed the scale of industrial disparity. In 1943, Soviet steel mills produced approximately 8.5 million tons total, covering all military and civilian needs during the most desperate phase of the war. American Lend-Lease provided an additional 2.3 million tons that year alone. More significantly, American steel consistently met specifications that Soviet production achieved only sporadically. Metallurgical analysis conducted at the Kharkov tank factory in October 1943 found that American armor plate maintained hardness tolerances within +15 Brunel points throughout entire production runs, while Soviet domestic production varied by up to +47 points, a difference directly affecting battlefield penetration resistance. The German war machine struggled to match this combined output. Albert Speer, Reich Minister of Armaments and War Production, reported to Hitler in November 1943 that German steel production had fallen to 24.3 million tons annually, less than 40% of combined American-Soviet output. The quality gap proved equally significant. Critical alloying elements, tungsten, molybdenum, vanadium, remained in chronic shortage throughout German industry. American producers, conversely, maintained abundant supplies of these crucial materials, incorporating them into every ton of steel shipped to the USSR. The logistics behind this material flow represented another triumph of industrial organization. Between January and December 1943, 127 cargo vessels departed American ports, carrying steel to Murmansk and Archangel. Despite losing 31 ships to German U-boats and aircraft, 96 vessels delivered their critical cargoes. The SS John Davison made 7 consecutive successful voyages between Philadelphia and Murmansk, delivering 73,500 tons of steel components, enough to equip approximately 3,675 T-34 tanks with American enhanced armor. These shipments continued despite Arctic conditions that froze seawater on contact with vessel superstructures, creating dangerous weight imbalances requiring constant chipping away by crews. Soviet records, reluctantly acknowledging dependence on foreign materials, documented American steel's distribution throughout the tank fleet. By December 1943, approximately 61% of operational T-34s contained significant American steel components. Technical reports from the Ural tank factory, Tankograd, confirmed that 83% of T-34s produced in the second half of 1943 incorporated American armor plate for turret construction, the most critical area for crew protection. These dry statistics explain the battlefield miracle of increased survivability that Soviet tank crews experienced but could not explain. German intelligence gradually recognized this material transformation. A captured Wehrmacht assessment, dated October 1943, concluded, Soviet T-34 armor quality has improved significantly, particularly in turret construction. Metallurgical analysis of captured examples indicates the incorporation of American production techniques and possibly American materials. These improvements have increased required penetration energy by approximately 37% compared to 1942 models. This clinical language masks the battlefield reality. German gunners watching in frustration as their shells bounced off Soviet tanks that previously would have been destroyed. The scale of American industrial contribution appeared in specific technical improvements. American-supplied electric arc furnaces installed at Magnitogorsk, increased Soviet armor steel production by 352,000 tons annually, while improving quality control. American rolling mills at the Kuznetsk Metallurgical Combine reduced plate production time by 41% while maintaining tighter thickness tolerances. American testing equipment, particularly spectrographs for chemical analysis, enabled consistent quality control previously impossible in Soviet production. These industrial enhancements created multiplicative effects beyond the raw tonnage figures. The human consequences of these industrial statistics emerged in battlefield reports. The 1st Guards Tank Army reported in November 1943 that 73% of tanks disabled by enemy fire could be recovered and repaired, compared to only 38% in early 1942. The 2nd Tank Corps documented increased crew confidence, leading to more aggressive tactics. The 3rd Guards Mechanized Corps noted that experienced crews now survived multiple engagements, preserving valuable human expertise previously lost with first-hit tank destruction. These developments created compounding advantages as Soviet armored forces retained institutional knowledge rather than constantly retraining replacement crews. German production struggled to counter these improvements. By late 1943, critical shortages forced compromise in armor quality. Panzer IV tanks produced in December 1943 used face-hardened armor with reduced molybdenum content, decreasing protection against Soviet 76.2mm shells. Metallurgical analysis of captured German Panthers revealed increasing carbon content, making plates harder but more brittle and prone to catastrophic cracking when struck. These compromises resulted directly from industrial shortages that American production never experienced. The statistical summary told an irrefutable story. American steel deliveries to USSR, 1941-1945, 4,478, 116 tons total. Specialized armor plate, 976,543 tons. High-grade alloy steel, 1,287, 451 tons. Tool steel, 723, 918 tons. Structural steel, 1,490, 204 tons. These figures represented more than accounting entries. They measured protection for Soviet tank crews. Each percentage point of improved survival translated to thousands of men returning to families rather than perishing in burning vehicles. The mathematics of abundance were being written in molybdenum and manganese, in precisely controlled carbon content and consistent rolling mill tolerances, revealing an American industrial capacity that rendered German production permanently outmatched. The numbers told a story that Soviet propaganda could never acknowledge, but that German intelligence gradually recognized. American steel had transformed Soviet armor into a survivable platform that would eventually drive to Berlin. April 1944. Outside Lvov, Ukraine. Senior Sergeant Mikhail Petrov gently ran his hand along the scarred turret of his T-34, feeling the 4 distinct impact points where German 88mm shells had struck but failed to penetrate. The crew had named their tank Immortal in chalk across the turret sides, a previously unthinkable act of optimism among Soviet tankers. Before American steel, Kovalev later wrote in his memoirs, "We never named our tanks. Why become attached to a vehicle that would become your coffin within days?" But after surviving our 7th engagement, we began to believe in something impossible, that we might live through this war. This psychological transformation appeared repeatedly in personal accounts declassified after the Cold War. Senior Lieutenant Ivan Bogdanov of the 1st Guards Tank Army recorded in his diary, "My 3rd T-34 has now survived 14 separate engagements. We've taken direct hits that should have killed us instantly. After the 8th time German shells bounced off our turret, I stopped expecting to die each morning." Medical officers noted declining rates of combat fatigue among tank crews, attributing this improvement to increased confidence in vehicle protection. Major Dmitry Losa, a tank battalion commander who would eventually reach Berlin, observed, "Experienced crews began to accumulate by mid-1943. Previously, few survived more than 3 battles. By 1944, entire crews remained intact through multiple operations, creating experienced units rather than constant replacements. The operational consequences proved dramatic. The 3rd Guards Tank Army changed tactics to capitalize on improved survivability. Their combat journal from February 1944 noted, "Tank commanders now advance more aggressively into German defensive positions, confident their armor will withstand initial anti-tank fire. This enables penetration of forward defenses before the enemy can adjust aim or relocate weapons." German after-action reports confirmed this tactical evolution. Oberst Hans-Ulrich Rudel, Germany's most decorated anti-tank pilot, complained in March 1944. Soviet tank commanders formally approached cautiously and withdrew after taking fire. Now they advanced directly through our anti-tank screens, accepting hits that previously deterred them. Individual crew accounts revealed the human dimension of this transformation. Sergeant Mikhail Petrov, a T-34 gunner who survived 31 separate engagements, described the moment his perspective changed. "After our 3rd battle where German shells bounced off our turret, we began carrying personal items, photographs, letters, books. Before, we carried nothing but essentials, knowing we would likely burn. Now we lived in our tank, rather than merely fighting from it." This seemingly small change reflected profound psychological shift. Tank crews who previously existed in perpetual fatalism now operated with confidence bordering on optimism. Technical assessments documented specific improvements, creating this transformation. The 37th Tank Technical Battalion analysed damaged but repairable T-34s in March 1944, finding that American steel armour sections withstood hits from German 75mm or PK-40 anti-tank guns at ranges as close as 400 metres without penetration, an improvement of 200 metres over 1942 production. More significantly, when penetration did occur, American steel armour typically fractured more cleanly rather than shattering into lethal fragments inside the crew compartment. This technical detail translated directly to increased crew survival, even when vehicles were disabled. German intelligence reluctantly acknowledged this evolution. A captured report from OKH, German Army High Command, dated January 1944, concluded, "Soviet T-34 protection has improved significantly since 1942. Metallurgical analysis indicates higher-grade alloy steel with improved face hardening. Current production T-34s require multiple hits from 75mm weapons to ensure destruction. This improvement appears consistent across the Soviet tank fleet, indicating systematic production changes rather than limited modifications." This assessment demonstrated German recognition that fundamental material improvements, not tactical changes, were responsible for increased Soviet tank survivability. For Soviet tank commanders, improved vehicle durability enabled tactical innovations previously considered impossible. Lieutenant Colonel Alexei Filatov of the 2nd Guards Tank Corps implemented extended penetration operations, sending small groups of tanks up to 50 kilometers behind German lines, a tactic previously avoided because vehicle breakdown or minor damage typically meant crew loss. His after-action report from April 1944 stated, "Deep penetration operations succeed because our tanks remain operational despite taking multiple hits. Crews continue fighting, knowing their armor will protect them from all but direct catastrophic hits." This operational flexibility created compounding tactical advantages beyond simple survival statistics. The human transformation extended beyond combat itself. Tank crews developed unprecedented unit cohesion as they survived multiple engagements together. Traditional Soviet practices of reassigning surviving crewmen to different vehicles declined as intact crews demonstrated superior performance. Captain Sergei Kirsanov, a company commander in the 5th Guards Tank Army, noted, "Crews who survived multiple battles together developed instinctive coordination. A commander could simply say, 'like at Korosten,' and his entire crew would understand the tactical approach without further explanation." This institutional memory preservation created veteran units rather than collections of individuals. German responses revealed frustration with this transformation. By mid-1944, German anti-tank units received orders to aim exclusively for track assemblies, engine compartments, and vision ports rather than hull or turret armor. Field modifications of anti-tank weapons attempted to compensate for improved Soviet armor. The 2nd SS Panzer Division added tungsten carbide caps to standard anti-tank rounds, attempting to improve penetration characteristics against American enhanced Soviet armor. These adaptations represented implicit acknowledgement that previous anti-tank doctrines had become inadequate against improved T-34s. The cumulative effect appeared in operational outcomes across the Eastern Front. During Operation Bagration in June-August 1944, Soviet tank forces sustained offensive operations for 68 consecutive days, a duration previously unimaginable given typical vehicle and crew loss rates. The 1st Guards Tank Army advanced 450 kilometers while maintaining 71% of its initial tank strength, compared to maximum advances of 200 kilometers, with only 30% remaining strength during 1942 operations. This statistical improvement represented the operational manifestation of improved survivability that began with the molecular structures of American steel. For the men inside these tanks, statistics translated to lived experience. As Sergeant Kovalev wrote after reaching Germany in early 1945, "We survived because our tank survived. Our tank survived because of steel we didn't make, but that saved us nonetheless. The Americans never knew our names, but their factories gave us life." This simple acknowledgement, absent from official Soviet history, captured the human reality beneath industrial statistics. A brotherhood of survival forged in American steel and tempered in the crucible of the Eastern Front. May 1945, Berlin, Germany. Captain Dmitry Loza stood atop his T-34 as Soviet flags unfurled across the conquered German capital. His tank, Unconquerable, had survived 27 separate engagements across 2,173 kilometers from Kursk to Berlin. The scarred but intact armor bearing 17 visible impact marks told a story that official Soviet histories would soon erase. Within months, the narrative of American industrial contribution to Soviet victory would vanish from permitted discussion, replaced by accounts of purely socialist triumph through sacrifice and revolutionary spirit. This historical amnesia, enforced through political necessity, obscured one of World War II's most consequential material relationships. The Cold War required ideological separation between Soviet achievement and American assistance. Yet in private conversations, the tankers knew differently. At a veterans' reunion in Kiev in 1982, recorded secretly and only released after the Soviet collapse, former T-34 commander Viktor Astakov raised a toast to American steel that kept Russian flesh intact. The assembled veterans, all former tank crewmen, nodded in silent acknowledgement of a truth they could not publicly express. Modern historical reassessment has finally quantified this obscured contribution. Declassified Soviet production records reveal that 57.8% of all T-34s produced after January 1943 contained significant American steel components. More importantly, metallurgical analysis of surviving vehicles confirms that American-supplied armor plate was systematically allocated to the most vulnerable areas, turrets and upper hull frontal sections, where protection directly affected crew survival. This strategic allocation magnified the impact beyond raw tonnage statistics, creating protection exactly where crews needed it most. The material impact created multiplicative effects throughout Soviet armored forces. By reducing T-34 loss rates from 74.3% during major operations in 1942 to 43.7% by late 1944, American steel effectively doubled Soviet offensive capability without requiring additional tank production. More significantly, improved crew survival created veteran formations rather than collections of inexperienced replacements. The 5th Guards Tank Army reached Berlin with 37% of its crews having survived more than 10 engagements, an experience level impossible under previous survivability rates. Post-war technical analysis confirmed the critical role of American metallurgical standards. When Soviet engineers reverse-engineered the T-54 tank in 1946, they incorporated American quality control standards for armor plate production. The specifications explicitly referenced material tolerances consistent with Lend-Lease supplied components, a rare official acknowledgement of American technical influence. These standards remained in Soviet tank production through the 1960s, creating a lasting industrial legacy beyond the immediate wartime contribution. Tank veterans' memoirs, published after the Soviet collapse, finally acknowledged this hidden history. Major Pavel Zhilin, a T-34 battalion commander who fought from Stalingrad to Prague, wrote in his 1998 autobiography, "Our lives were saved by American steel." The party never admitted this, but every tank man knew that American-made armor sections withstood hits that Soviet plates could not. We survived because of industrial quality from a political enemy. This retrospective honesty gave voice to knowledge tank crews had carried silently for decades. Museum examples today reveal physical evidence of this international industrial cooperation. The T-34 displayed at Kubinka Tank Museum outside Moscow shows the distinctive metallurgical patterns of American rolling mills in its turret armor, visible under spectrographic analysis. The vehicle, which survived 11 confirmed hits from German anti-tank weapons, represents the physical embodiment of Soviet-American industrial synthesis. Similar analysis of T-34s at Bovington Tank Museum in England and Aberdeen. Proving Ground in Maryland confirms that American-supplied armor played critical protective roles in Soviet vehicles. The historical irony remains profound. Cold War adversaries had once shared industrial strength in defeating fascism. The Soviet tank crews who rolled into Berlin often survived because of American steel protecting their vehicles. These same men would later train to fight Americans during Cold War tensions, operating inside tanks whose design improvements incorporated lessons learned from American metallurgy. This contradiction, ideological opposition built upon industrial cooperation, represents one of history's most consequential ironies. Statistical evidence tells the undeniable story of American impact on Soviet armor protection. American steel deliveries enabled the production of approximately 25,000 additional T-34 tanks beyond what Soviet domestic steel production could support. More critically, American metallurgical standards improved armor quality throughout Soviet production, creating protection that saved an estimated 27,000 Soviet tank crewmen who would have perished with previous armor standards. These numbers represent not merely industrial statistics, but human lives preserved through international industrial cooperation. The philosophical significance extends beyond material calculation. American industrial might ultimately contributed to defeating fascism through an unexpected alliance with Soviet courage. The molecular structures of American steel, precisely controlled carbon content, optimal distribution of manganese and molybdenum, created physical protection for Soviet soldiers advancing across Eastern Europe. This material reality transcended political differences, creating a physical embodiment of Allied cooperation that exceeded diplomatic arrangements. The steel itself, indifferent to ideology, protected human lives regardless of the political systems that produced or employed it. As Cold War tensions faded into history, honest assessment of this cooperation finally became possible. In 2005, joint Russian-American metallurgical analysis of surviving T-34s confirmed what veterans had long known. Approximately 60% of surviving tanks contained American-supplied armor components in critical protection areas. The physical evidence, preserved in museum examples, provided irrefutable confirmation of what political necessity had long obscured. Soviet tanks had indeed been made more survivable through American industrial contribution. For the tank veterans themselves, this belated historical acknowledgement provided validation of lived experience. At a final reunion in Moscow in 2012, with only 23 surviving T-34 crewmen present, 97-year-old Sergeant Mikhail Petrov touched a preserved section of American-made turret armor and said simply, "This is what brought me home." This quiet acknowledgement, from a man who had survived 32 tank battles across 3 years of continuous combat, captured the human reality beneath industrial statistics. The lasting legacy appears in modern Russian tank design philosophy, the emphasis on crew protection, multi-layered armor, sophisticated composite materials, crew extraction systems, began with lessons learned from American-enhanced T-34 survivability. The conceptual shift from viewing tanks as expendable weapons to survival vehicles for valuable crews can be traced directly to the experience of improved protection that American steel first provided. This philosophical evolution, transcending political systems and historical eras, represents perhaps the most significant and enduring contribution. What began as material aid became psychological transformation, technical evolution, and ultimately historical legacy. The Soviet tank crews who couldn't believe American steel made their T-34s unbreakable experienced not merely improved physical protection, but a fundamental reconceptualization of armored warfare. Their survival, enabled by American industrial capacity paired with Soviet design ingenuity, created the veteran formations that ultimately reached Berlin. The story reminds us that beneath ideological conflicts lie human realities. The universal desire for survival and the power of industrial cooperation to preserve life, even amidst history's most destructive conflict.